Hello and welcome to the Craft and Calling. I am so happy to be here with you today. I am your host, Christine Marie, and today we are talking about relationships. We're talking about the through line between guys on the field, the PMs primarily, all the way through to the owners. A lot of times there's disparity and there's a lack of communication in the way that owners don't really know what's going on and the real problems that are being faced there. And there's not systems in place for a lot of organizations, big or small. And so I am so incredibly thrilled to be joined by Sam Hoffman today, who also is my brother. We both served as partners in our family business, Hoffman Painting and Finishing. And since Sam has actually moved back to Texas with his beautiful wife and two daughters and is working as a project manager. So he really came up as a PM, became a partner, and then is back at a PM. So he's had this project management role bookend this opportunity and experience as being an owner. And he's maintained stake in the company and maintained ownership there as well as he's moved on. But he adds such a different dynamic and perspective for both owners and project managers. So Sam, I am so grateful and honored that you're here with us today. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. No, I'm very happy to be here. I know we tried to get this on the books a couple times and finally able to make it work. So no, I'm very
Yes.
happy to be here.
Well, I'm so grateful that we're here. I see the sun literally rising behind you in Texas as we chat.
Yes.
I appreciate you making the time because I know that you've got a lot on your plate, especially being a father to young children. So grateful for this. So Sam, one of the biggest problems that I've been seeing is that there just is not a system in place when it comes to communication. And before we kind of get to what are some real things and practical tips and applications for owners and project managers, I'd like to really hone in on the problem. Where is the disconnect so often when it comes to the life cycle of the customer itself?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great thing to focus on because everything, in my opinion, everything that we do in life, professionally or personally, all hinges on relationship.
Mm,
That looks a little bit different professionally than in a personal relationship, of course, but it's just as important, if not more important, in my opinion. So I think it's very easy for field guys and office people, definitely on the owner versus project manager roles, but even sometimes if it's field superintendents versus admin in the office. So when there's not a lot of overlap, um, in person, you're not personally together or talking extremely often. There's several things that go into that, but I think the communication or lack of communication is something that's it's very prevalent in our space. Um, Field guys tend to be around field guys, and they only call in when there's a problem. Office people, same thing. So depending on the size of the company, of course, and it can vary company to company, but from my experience, for the most part, the upper management or the owner, they're usually in the office and they usually stay in the office. And then there's occasional check-ins if the field guys initiate it or if the office tends to initiate. But it really breaks down into how well you communicate, how often you are talking about what the problems are on the field, what's actually happening. A lot of times those calls, when they do happen, are more along the lines of just, hey, is everything good? Rather than, hey, talk to me about this project. How are we doing? Let's walk through. Let's meet on site. Let's really dive into that.
mm,
So depending on the company, of course, but I've seen that a lot in being 15 years in the industry. Um,
yes.
so I think that's one of the key things we're dealing with.
Yeah, I love that you said, regardless of whether it's personal or professional or somewhere in between, everything hinges on relationships. And so the strength of that, it sounds like what you're saying is ultimately predicated on communication. And I love that you went there because I was listening to a conversation with a business owner, multi-million-dollar business. He was asked, what is the number one skill that you would teach your kids to ensure that they're on a path to generating wealth, and even, maybe they become entrepreneurs, but what's the number one thing? He said communication. That is the number
Wow.
one skill to develop to ensure that you'll always effectively be in the green, regardless of business, regardless of industry.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree.
Mm,
Absolutely. And it's interesting with my girls being a little bit younger, and so you don't I haven't really thought through some of that with them being 2 and 1 year old. Um, but I wholeheartedly agree.
Mm. Yes, and even I mean, you already kind of right out of the gate talked about relationships in either regard. What have been some core principles for you that have been like talk about a through line from the owner to the project manager, the guys on the field, the guys in the office? What's a consistent pattern that you've seen and even a core principle? So the principle and
Mm.
kind of almost like the ethos of communication and then an application for that to be done well in regards to that communication style on the field and then in the office.
Yeah, honestly, I think so much of it is the same, whether it's work or personal life, which
Mhm.
we just touched on.
Yeah.
Um, but in every leadership position I've been in life, whether it was growing up or sports or brief time in the military or at work, I think the consistent principle has always been know what your people are dealing with and learn how to help them. And so sometimes people will come right out of the gate when they're asked, "Hey, what are you struggling with? What can I help you with?" Some people will answer immediately, some people won't, and that goes to knowing your people and knowing having the relationship to understand what they're truly saying, or if it's something I need to drop everything and go meet them on site, and that very well could be the case. Or maybe we just need to flush it out a little bit, or maybe everything's truly okay. But with everyone being so different, um, and honestly, it's the same principle with my wife, or soon with my kids. Is if there's an issue, try to know them well enough to read through a response if there is something that's being unsaid, and if there's something I
Mhm.
need to do, then to try to step in and assist with that. Um,
Right.
so I think knowing them and having spent the time with and willing to truly talk and listen, hear what they're saying is monumental and often gets missed in our fast-paced lives and fast-paced industry.
Yes. Yes, and I'm thinking too about, different, phases of the business in terms of size, right? Because if you're the owner of technically you can be owner of a $10 million company and still have a lean team. Maybe you sub people out or maybe you actually are having a service that doesn't require a ton of like roofing. Like let's say you're doing something like that and it's a much larger scale in terms of return on each project. So maybe the service itself is a higher earning service than $1,000 job here and there, and then to make it 10 million, you need a big
Oh,
group
sure.
that
Yeah.
so let's say you've got a team of under 25 people. In order for the owner to maintain that level of connection and knowing the people, how would you encourage people to kind of go about doing that in terms of establishing the relationship to begin with and then being able to understand moving forward? Like the foundation is built.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like once you start getting, um, into the teens and above on employees, probably anywhere from 15 to 50. I would assume it's probably a common principle, in that you need, as from the owner, you need good leaders on your
Yeah.
team. You're not personally going to be able to have a very deep relationship with every single person. Now, at 20 or even up to 50, you can still know everyone's name. You can be somewhat familiar, and I think a lot of those things go a long way to your team. So definitely not checking out, especially if you are owner operator or depending on how involved you are with the company. Um, but it goes a long way for someone to know your name, um, from the employee standpoint. And so when I started in the industry, I worked for a national company that had at the time probably 15 or 20 offices around the country. And I was doing a training program at their headquarters in Northern Virginia, and the owner walked in, and I had only seen him once in 6 months, and he knew my name, and I was shocked.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. I was just training there and getting ready to be shipped off to one of the offices, and so I was
Wow.
sure that he spent the time prepping leading up to knowing he was going to be in the office, looking through and probably refamiliarizing himself however he could with whoever he was going to run into, and that spoke volumes to me, that he knew that was important and really focused on that. So obviously, we're talking about a little bit different situation if you're talking 15 to 30 employees. But if you are working there full time, even as an owner, um, then I
Mm.
think you need to be very careful who you have as your lieutenants, and who your chief people are that people are then answering to. But then also making sure that you're having team meetings, you're stepping in on certain groups that are meeting, smaller groups. So you're checking in on the field guys when they're having their meeting, or you're stepping in on the sales guys when they're having their meeting, and trying to get them in smaller settings where they're seeing your face. They know that they can trust you because you care, and you show that by stepping into their lives. And so I think a lot of the little personal things like that go a long way from the employee side of you.
So good. I'm even thinking of almost having like a team directory and having it categorized by office so that
Yeah,
so that you can have the face and the name. I Sam,
yeah.
I love that he knew your name. You know, that's massive, especially a national company that he was able to do that. That says a
I
lot.
was shocked. I
Yeah.
mentioned it to the one who was doing the training, and he said, "Oh yeah, I think he goes through a directory before he goes to every office." And that was such a good idea, so worth it.
That is amazing. And really, so much of us, regardless if we're in the trades or in another industry, we're all human beings and we all have a similar emotional thermometer, regardless of
Yes,
how much we're in tune with it or not. We still are motivated by the loyalty that's breeded through relationship, through the knowing of the owner, through the knowing of the mission, through even having someone really, really great above you, but being able to know that the owner isn't that far away if I really
yes,
had a problem, or even just the owner's not that far away, he really cares. You know, maybe you'll never actually go to him with a real issue depending on the size, but being able to know and rest in the fact that the owner is involved and has a buy-in, you know, because you're
yeah,
doing all of this for them, you know, it's their
right,
company. So I think that that's really important on the emotional component, you know, really allowing for relationships to not just be logistics, but to have that
yeah.
emotional component.
Yeah, absolutely. And we started this off talking about the PM versus owner specific situation. And a lot, depending on the company size, the PM could report directly to the owner, or the PM
Mm.
could have a branch manager, or could report to someone else, head of production, or something like that. And so I think it's very important to focus on the owner to employee connection. But to your point, what you just said, it's regardless of who the PM reports to, from a PM specifically, they need to know that whether it's the owner or the head of production or whoever they're reporting to has the same mindset. Because when you get put into that upper level of management, even if you're not quite an owner, but you're representing,
Yes.
and it's still the same. It's the same thing. It's slightly different because they don't actually own the company, but they probably make more money than you. They're probably more seasoned than you. They probably know a little bit more than you. And so, from a lot of perspectives, that's kind of fill in that role regardless whether they technically own it or not. So I would say it's the exact same situation whether it's an owner or head of production or whoever you're reporting to.
I'm glad that you said the aspect about representatives because that is what it is. You know, you said whoever your lieutenants are. So from the owner's perspective, who are the people you're putting in place? But also
Yeah.
recognizing that those people are the representative of you, the mission of the company, the heartbeat of why we're doing what we're doing. And so that gives a whole other heightened element for why we need to invest in these people depending on the ranks, right, of how far down you go and how far you are removed from the PM, but having a really good
Sure.
process in place for understanding. And Sam, tell me where I'm missing this here. When I'm thinking about representative, I'm thinking about representative of the brand, representative of the mission, but also representative of the systems and like the way we do things here,
Yeah.
representative of the culture and what are our values, because our why is different than the how we execute. And that shows up
Hmm.
in, yes, the systems and processes, but also the character in terms of the actual manifestation of the person doing it. What am I missing there in terms of representative?
I, the why is, I'm glad you added that in. I think a lot of people can miss that, especially if, depending
Mm.
on what industry you're in, but even in construction, that's still an incredibly important aspect to have. Honestly, I wouldn't add too much in there except maybe flesh out the why a little bit more, because I think that if you don't have the why, then the how doesn't exist. So I would say that the why is really the driving factor. Um, you need the skill set, you need the materials, you need the team, excuse me, the coordination. But if you don't have that why, then everything's going to be half-hearted at best. So the why drives it, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And the why is what differentiates you from another company, and
Yes.
what breeds the loyalty. I love that. That's so good. It's without the why, you're just like everybody else. That's such a good point. Um,
Yeah, and touching back on representatives, if you don't mind,
yeah.
real quick. So, and we can edit this a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I didn't. I was going to switch back and talk about putting Everin Jr. in position at Hoffman
Yes.
if you wanted to.
Yes, I would love, yeah, I will definitely want to
Okay.
talk.
Do
Okay.
you want to sit shift in that?
Yeah, let me go ahead and pick back up. Okay,
Sure.
so I love this concept of having the why. And let's talk about, okay, the how, the actual training, because a lot of companies, before they can really get to that next level, like this is a prerequisite. You need to not have the business tied to you as the owner. And we actually found this. This was kind of the state of the family business when you and I got involved. Was Dad was not free. He actually couldn't scale because everything was tied to him. He couldn't sell anything because the business was him. There were no systems in place. And then
Yeah.
succession, at the time when he was really thinking about what do I want to do, nobody had really come forward. And then when he talked about getting rid of the business, it was like, no, wait,
Yeah.
we don't do that. And so talking about the transition from the owner actually instituting representatives. Can we talk about that? Like, what's the process the owners need to go through in order to set up those people, those field lieutenants, so to say?
Yeah. No, that was a really big focus on my part when we
Mhm.
first got up there and got started up and when I went back to Maryland and rejoined you over there. Um, and yes, it was not easy, and Dad had gone to a fairly small team, so it was manageable. But
Mhm.
you're right; he had no systems in place. There was one of the crew members who was kind of a pseudo leader at times, but nothing was ever officially asked of him. He
Right.
wasn't being compensated to be a leader. There weren't um, expectations and requirements set forward to him that was understood from the owner and from him. Um, so when we went up there and joined in, and I took over as head of production, that was huge of trying to identify two guys to step up as field leaders. One would probably be this guy, and he's shown a lot of promise, but needs some work on what we expect of him and how we're doing this. And then we need to identify somebody else. And the first job that I was really involved in when I came back was actually your house,
Yeah.
if you remember. And uh, there were several quality control issues. There was a lot of confusion. There was just a lack of understanding of what was happening with that job.
Right.
Um, and I was pretty surprised because growing up, we had always been under the assumption that the quality that our family's company provided was the best quality. And it needed to be. That's how Dad had always that's what he had always required of his guys and his teams. And when he had the people who were able to run the field for him, I think it wasn't that quality. And
Right.
then when those people were lost, then Dad tried to do that, and that looked at going out in the field once a week, depending on which job they were on, and probably just out there very quickly, and then running back to the office or running out to sales. And you just can't effectively have quality control if that's what you're doing with no one who's responsible to take over that position for you in the field. Um, so all that to say, so I went back to Dad and said, hey, this might surprise you, but we've got a big problem out here. So you focus on the office, I'll focus on the field, but this is what I'd like to do. And I told him that I wanted to talk to the first guy and try to identify somebody else, and give them a raise and tell them what their standards were and hold them to that standard. And if they failed, then they would not get a monthly bonus. If they succeeded, then they would get a monthly bonus. And try and have some incentive there, but also have it clearly written out for what's required of them, what we expect of them. And also setting the stage for an easy little bit of slap on the wrist, not anything drastic punishment wise, but if they do fail in something, it's very easy to have a little bit of monetary carrot out there that you can withhold or give, and just have something tangible that they knew what
Yeah,
was an actual reward that they would or would not get depending on how they did their job. So Dad
absolutely.
was all for that. Spoke with the first guy. He was very accepting, very willing. He's somebody who's been in the company since he was a teenager. We've kind of all grown up around him just from how
Yeah.
long he's been around. And he did a great job stepping up, and he and I started talking a lot more. We were talking multiple times a day. I was trying to be on job sites at least every other day, depending on how many job sites we had going on. So making sure I was on every single job at least every other day.
Hmm.
And then I would walk with him every time, and I'd say, "Okay, what do you see here? Okay, these are a couple things I see." And it was funny because he's a much better painter than I am, much more knowledgeable. So I would talk through things with him along the lines of, "What are you using here and why?" Kind of educate me. If there was a question I had, I would bring it up, and
Love
even
it.
though I was an owner, I respected his experience and knowledge, and so I never. I think there might have been one time when we were talking more carpentry where I said, "Hey, I think you need to do it this way," but I never told him what to do painting wise, which was hopefully a good thing. Um, but he really stepped up and took over control of his team. And then when we did a 6 month review with all the guys, I asked each one of them individually, um, "Hey, who would you like to follow and work under as a second leader on the team?" And I had my eye on somebody, and I've been speaking with this first guy. So we were both kind of in agreement, and every single member of the team pointed out a different guy
Wow.
named Ever.
I didn't know
Um,
you did that. I love that, Sam.
yeah, yeah, because I really wanted to the falling under Junior. The team was all used to, because even though he didn't quite have the reins officially handed to him, he was the guy who communicated with Dad. He was the guy who ran out and picked up materials, so they all knew he was the lead guy, even though he hadn't been officially held to those standards.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was very important to put someone in place that everybody respected and believed in, and knew was the hardest worker on the team, and knew was extremely hardworking and knowledgeable.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so that was important, and that was a role that took a little bit more time to play around with, and he's really grown into it. But he was a little bit more of a quiet, soft-spoken guy. Doesn't like having the spotlight on him. Didn't speak great English, so he had a little bit of trouble communicating with me. But we ended up getting a good relationship, a really good relationship actually. And he'd practice his English, and I'd practice some Spanish, and we'd call in someone else if we needed to get help on communication occasionally. And there were a couple of miscues along the way, but he's grown into a really, really quality team lead for the company. Um,
Yes.
so that's been very encouraging to see the fruition of that.
Mm. I mean, it really completely changed the business. It really transformed it so that Dad had freedom to, I mean,
Yeah,
he played golf a couple of times doing business development and going to the CEO groups. And it was really, man, he came alive. It was so beautiful to see that. And so as we think about the craft and calling and what we're doing here and what we're talking about is exactly that. How do we free ourselves to make sure that the craft is honed, right? To make sure that
hmm
we maintain quality, because we have to have freedom in order to even be able to do that. Like, even be able to go show up on a job or go and cultivate the leaders who are the ones actually making sure QA is being handled. We also then need to have our calling in place, which is, to your point about the way that we show up on the field is so often the way that we show up at home. Are we actually remembering the why for ourselves personally of why we're doing this in the first place? Our families, are the
yeah,
relationships they're strong? And so this is what you just talked about, Sam, and what you did for the company was just it was so powerful and so impactful, and it's still surviving today after you left. Both of the guys are still maintaining their lead
hmm
status, and I believe that the bonus structure is still in place. And so that's also, it's, you went really slowly in the implementation of it. And then you also left slowly so that it wasn't just a cold jerk. It was, is this actually sustainable for me to
Yeah.
distance myself from it? So I want to kind of back up to the beginning of what you were saying, where one of the things that really stood out to me was that you would walk on the job and say, what are you seeing? Because it gives him the opportunity to look, because maybe he hasn't yet, but then also
Right.
you get to tell him what you're seeing, so he starts learning your standards. So
Yeah.
the representatives in our company need to know the standards of the owner. And what you identified first, that first project, my house that was being done, it was a 1980 build. We knocked out the wall 2 feet, pushed it out, knocked down 2 walls, added an interior railing, rebuilt the outside. It was a big job. And so what happens is that if the owner is too tied to the job being executed, not just could we threaten the loss of quality assurance, and frankly, I actually have a feeling like it would have probably gotten to the point of dad's expectation had you not been involved, but it would have been so costly. That's the
Mhm.
thing, is that maybe the job actually does end up looking the way you want in terms of your standards, but to go back and redo something, I believe that the science shows it's 10x the cost of the initial
Yeah.
material purchased when you add it all up. So it is so costly to the business and to the bottom line, because we price our clients for a certain quote and then we make
Right.
mistakes. We're not communicating with them. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, and I think right there, I think that's important because I believe that quality it does not only mean what it looks like when you're done.
Yes.
I
Oh,
think a lot about how you run the job plays into that.
yes.
So having to go back and redo things does not mean it's quality. Now, it's
Mhm.
probably the better option than to leave it looking bad. But anytime that you're going out, yes, it's costly for you. It makes you look incompetent to your customer. Um, if the customer is not a family member, they're probably furious. Even if they are a family member, they're probably not happy. And especially when it's very avoidable things. I think if that job had been done after you and I stepped away, rather than when we were first getting involved in the company, I think it would have run completely differently.
And honestly,
Um,
what a blessing we had that job for you and I both to see what
yeah,
was the state of things.
yeah, and Dad had no idea.
Right.
The guys hadn't told him because I don't think the guys realized it wasn't going smoothly, but I
Right.
don't know if they, especially because no one was officially, excuse me, I'm sorry, because no one was officially in that leadership role and
Mm.
no one was officially in charge of, hey, we got a problem here. It's my responsibility to reach out to Mr. Hoffman.
Mhm.
With no one
Right.
having that, yeah, there was no clear way of here's a problem. Now, what do you do about it? No one knew what to do about it unless Dad eventually figured out about it. And at that point, it probably would have been months down the road when you're calling him angry.
That's so good. Man, I'm so really, as we're talking, I just made a quick note there. Quality is at the second the customer reaches out, and
Oh,
even
absolutely.
does your website and your social
Yeah.
and all the digital presence, does that actually adequately represent what they're going to experience? And then quality at every single touch point. I
Yep.
think, when you first said quality, I think so many of us will think the end product, but no, quality is so often in the process, because that's what builds the trust with the customer. God forbid anything goes wrong or there's any delays. If
Yep.
you really have quality in the process at the early stages, it allows for extra grace if
Yeah.
anything can go wrong. The other thing you said, which I really appreciated, was effectively, are there true requirements and expectations outlined for what's expected of the person, and does compensation match it? So
Hmm.
something that I really want to lean into with you right now is not just waiting for when people ask for raises, but really taking the initiative to see, you saw ever before you even submitted that survey to the guys. So
Hmm.
you had already charted everything with Junior, with the requirements and expectations and compensation, and kind of created a plan, but then you were looking ahead and looking out for who else could kind of fit that. Can you just talk about the initiative of, we kind of already knew Junior was a leader, but what were the signs you were looking for in Ever that really proved to you that he would be a good representative?
Yeah, so it was actually interesting about Ever, and especially if he ever sees this. Um, but when I first came up, Ever had been with the company for I believe 6 months or maybe 9 months.
Mm,
So I was just meeting him for the first time. Dad actually uh, was not very fond of Ever, and I don't know if you knew that,
I
but
remember that.
Ever, yeah. So Ever is a great guy as you get to know him. He does not come across as the most warm and open individual, especially if the communication and
Yes.
language is a little bit tricky. Um, so with Dad being extremely busy and not able to truly invest his time and attention when he was on site, he probably only saw Ever very quickly in passing. Ever probably didn't turn around and say hi, Mr. George.
Yeah.
I'm sure that didn't come across great. So when I went to Dad and said, "Hey, I'm going to make Ever the next leader," Dad was a little bit skeptical, and we sat down and talked about, it, and I explained why, and what the guys had said. What the guys had said was obviously very big, and then I ran it past Junior, and Junior was 100% on board. Um, so once Dad heard that, then he said, "Okay, I get it. It's your call. Go ahead." Um, and it's again turned out well. So some of the things I was looking for was waiting to see uh, several kind of basic things, just who's on time, who works hard, who's knowledgeable, who do people respond to in the field, and that's a big one because there is a natural tend people who have leadership qualities tend to be followed, um, and it could be just by one person, it could be by 50 people. um, and so whether Ever was on a job with one other person or he was leading the entire crew of, I think that time we had 8 or 9, um, just kind of standing in the background and watching who's asking who when they have questions,
Right.
who's taking initiative to help and and anticipate problems before they occur. And we had several great guys on the team. We still do, but Ever was head and shoulders taking those steps when no one else was.
So good. So good. I wrote down as you were saying, it's the showing up on time. That is a big one. that's
Yes.
that's a bigger deal than I think we all kind of give
Yeah.
it credit for. That's big. And it's leading by example, right? This is the standard we have as a company. Who are people just literally doing it without having to be told and having it modeled
Yeah.
for them? Because that's another thing of a true leader is that they are able to kind of self perpetuate their own leadership, so to say.
Hmm.
They don't
Yeah.
need they don't need to follow, which is a big blessing. You said time, their work ethic, knowledgeable, but then just who's naturally like leaning into them and what they say and the direction they take and who's following. So
Yeah.
I really love that. That's really good. Um, this I want to talk about this briefly, and then we can wrap up here. I really, looking back, I think about Dad and how, man, that takes a lot of humility for him to have an interaction with somebody that isn't positive. I mean, it's like you got to crack beneath the surface and then you find this wonderful guy, but very quiet, very, very quiet. And for a lot of people who don't know how to kind of break through that exterior, they can be kind of offended or slighted by that. And
Yeah.
so what an incredible thing that Dad, having run his business for 35 plus years, let you come in and say, we're going to put this. I mean, obviously you were asking, you were respectful about it, but he trusted you and took his hands off. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that's really, really important when you do have representatives come in, whether it's a co-owner or co-partner or just ranks down, being able to let go. So can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that? Because obviously you had to let go as you started to really let them take over. What was that process like? And what advice would you give for owners as they seek to let go of the reins?
Yeah, there were definitely times where it was a little bit tricky to step back, and know that we were gonna have to trust the process that we had put in place. And there was also something really exciting about that because we had spent 2 years, 2.5 years working on that. and really wanted to test drive it and make sure it worked. And we did that slowly, incrementally along the way. Certain jobs I would just go to a little bit less often, or when I would do the walkthrough with the site leader, I would say less and I would just let him point out. And if there was something I had a concern with, then I would certainly speak up. But the longer those guys were in those seats and the more they took ownership of them, the more I started keeping my mouth shut and really trying to encourage them to be the primaries on it, letting them feel that sense of ownership and trust and pride that this is my responsibility. I'm going to make sure this job is done well. I'm going to make sure the customer's happy, and I don't need someone else to come in over my shoulder and call the customer and say, "Hey, was there anything we missed?" That's my responsibility to catch everything, and then my responsibility to talk to the owner, and then call the boss and say, "Hey, we're 100%," and knowing that that's true. So there was a lot of excitement about that,
Yeah.
but I really just started slowly easing back, um, and just wanting to make sure that what we had instilled had truly taken hold, and the guys were fully bought in, which they were, I believe, um, and still are, and still
Yeah.
going very well now. A couple years later.
I love it. I love you said pride over their work. When we think about the motives for our representatives, and I've been calling them representatives because they're really multiple layers of leadership and multiple roles. And frankly, I just like that concept of who's the representative of you as the owner. Do they
Yeah.
do it well? Because you talked about obviously compensation. There is a very real thing about people being motivated by money for
Yeah.
survival, for vacation, whatever it is that they're motivated by. Pride of their work. I love that as another key driver of the representative. Another is the relationship with the owner. The owner getting a pat on the back actually can do a lot. And so
Mhm.
when you think about the core drivers, and you said this at the very beginning, so we're having a full circle. Who are they? Because each person is going to be motivated at the end of the day by something different. One of the girls on my team, I asked her, I was eager and like offered a promotion to COO, and she didn't want it. She loved her role. She loved working with the clients directly. And so it's like, okay, what are the core motivations of these people? What's actually
Mhm.
going to be the thing that moves the needle? And then self-administering whatever their core motivation is, whether it's, with money, you want to be really careful on that. But what else could there be of maybe even helping them on the financial
Yeah.
side to really plan for a vacation or something? How can we use this money so that,
Sure.
we maintain reciprocity, but ultimately really tapping at the core kind of urge for every single person so that they really feel seen and known and inspired to keep going.
That's really good, Christine. Yeah, that is
Yep.
huge.
Yeah. Sam, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for this conversation. This was so important. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Y'all, I will see you tomorrow on the Craft and Calling podcast.